When two officers cornered an old, trembling dog in a backyard, they had no idea who his owner was. But when Keanu Reeves pulled up and saw them threatening his 14-year-old rescue dog, everything changed. What started as a routine police call quickly spiraled into a high-stakes confrontation, one that would ignite a viral movement, challenge authority, and prove that when it comes to protecting the innocent, Keanu doesn't just play a hero on screen. He is one in real life. The late afternoon sun cast long golden shadows over the quiet Los Angeles neighborhood. The world moved at a slow, comfortable pace here, neighbors tending to their gardens, children riding their bikes along the sidewalk, and the distant hum of life carrying on as usual. But not in Keanu Reeves' backyard. Here, something was terribly wrong. Max, the 14-year-old Labrador German Shepherd mix, had been dozing peacefully in his favorite sunspot, the warmth seeping into his aging bones. His muzzle, once dark and strong, was now peppered with silver, a testament to the long, loving years he had spent with his owner. But today the peace shattered. The loud crackle of a police radio jolted him awake. Two strangers in dark uniforms loomed over him. Their heavy boots scuffed against the grass, their eyes cold and assessing. Max, groggy and confused, let out a low, uncertain whine. His tail curled tightly against his frail body, a silent plea for understanding. But understanding was the last thing he received. "Move it!" The taller officer, Officer Callahan, barked, his voice sharp like a whip. Max flinched at the sudden noise. His body stiffened, but his tired legs barely responded. The second officer, Brooks, hesitated, glancing at his partner. "He's old, man. Look at him." But Callahan was already stepping forward, baton drawn, his grip firm. "Big dog like this? Doesn't matter how old. If he snaps, it'll be too late." Max's heart pounded. The scent of aggression hung thick in the air. His instincts screamed danger, but his body, weak and aching, refused to obey. He cowered, pressing himself against the fence, chest heaving. Then came the worst sound of all. The metallic click of a taser being unholstered. "Call animal control," Callahan muttered, thumb hovering over the trigger. "If he resists, we take him down ourselves." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the air. Across the street, Julia Reynolds, a longtime neighbor, had been watching from her porch. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Oh my God," she whispered. "They're going to hurt him." Her phone was already recording before she even realized it. "HY," she shouted, bolting from her house. "What the hell are you doing?" "That's Keanu Reeves' dog." Officer Callahan barely spared her a glance. "Ma'am, step back." "No." Julia's voice trembled with fury. "Are you seriously about to tase an old rescue dog in his own yard?" Max let out a pitiful whimper, shrinking even further into himself. Officer Brooks' grip on his baton visibly slackened. His partner, however, was unmoved. "Ma'am," Callahan snapped, his temper flaring, "this dog is dangerous. We got a report of a large aggressive stray chasing kids." Julia's hands shook as she tightened her grip on her phone. "Then maybe you should have made sure you had the right dog before storming in here like lunatics." But before Callahan could retort, the roar of an engine cut through the tension like a blade. A sleek black Ford Mustang came to a smooth but deadly stop in the driveway. The driver's side door swung open, and Keanu Reeves stepped out. For a moment, the entire world froze. The growing crowd of neighbors held their breath. The warm evening breeze barely rustled the trees. The air between Keanu and the officers crackled with unspoken intensity. His usual easygoing demeanor? Gone. This was not the gentle, humble actor the world knew. This was a man who had just come home to find armed strangers threatening his dog. He didn't yell. He didn't rush forward in blind rage. Instead, he moved slowly, deliberately, his gaze fixed on the officers like a silent, unbreakable force. "What the hell is going on?" His voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that precedes a storm. Officer Callahan, still oblivious to who he was dealing with, straightened his stance. "Sir, step back. We received a complaint about a dangerous dog." Keanu's gaze flicked to Max, who was curled up in the dirt, trembling. His fingers curled into fists. "That is a 14-year-old dog who can barely stand without help," he said, his voice dangerously low. "And you have a taser pointed at him." Callahan shifted uncomfortably but held his ground. "Sir, we have protocol to follow." There was a... Keanu took a single step forward, closing the distance between them. "Protocol?" His tone was lethal now. "Protocol means storming into someone's yard without a warrant? Threatening an animal without even assessing the situation?" Officer Brooks, sweating now, shot a nervous glance at the growing audience of neighbors, many of whom were holding up their phones, recording. "Guys, maybe we should have..." "Shut it," Callahan snapped. But his voice wavered. He could feel it. The power dynamic had shifted. This wasn't just some angry pet owner anymore. This was Keanu Reeves, a man millions adored. A man who had built a global reputation for kindness and quiet integrity. A man who had, ironically, become a cultural icon for fighting for his dog. And now he was standing between them and the trembling animal they had just threatened. Callahan tightened his grip on his taser, but suddenly the world felt wrong. It wasn't just the cameras. It was the way Keanu was looking at him. Not with rage. Not with arrogance. But with something much, much worse. Disgust. A deep, soul-cutting disappointment that no amount of power, no badge, no authority could ever outweigh. "Holster your weapons," Keanu said, voice like steel. "Now." For the first time in his career, Callahan hesitated. The silence stretched. Then, click. The taser disappeared into its holster. Max whimpered softly, nuzzling against Keanu's leg. The actor knelt beside him, running a hand gently over his fur. His dog, the companion who had been there for him through everything, was shaking in fear because of them. And in that moment, Keanu knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. A thick silence hung in the air, pressing down on the street like the weight of an unspoken truth. Keanu Reeves remained crouched beside Max, his hand gently stroking the old dog's head. The rhythmic motion a silent reassurance that everything was going to be okay. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The tension between him and the officers crackled like a live wire, and the quiet murmurs from the growing crowd only fueled the pressure. Officer Callahan's jaw was set, his pride a fragile thing in the face of what was quickly becoming a public spectacle. His partner, Officer Brooks, had already shifted uneasily, his hand hovering near his belt as if silently debating whether to remove the baton still gripped in his palm. But the damage was done. The cameras were rolling. The world was watching. And standing before them wasn't just any dog owner. It was Keanu Reeves. The weight of realization settled over Callahan's face, but he wasn't ready to back down completely. "Sir," he said, clearing his throat, though his voice lacked the authority it once held. "This dog was reported as dangerous. We were following protocol." Keanu exhaled slowly, standing to his full height, his shoulders squared, his presence commanding in a way that required no aggression, only certainty. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze piercing through Callahan like a blade. "Did you even look at him?" His voice was calm, but each word carried an unmistakable edge. "Did you take 5 seconds to assess before reaching for your weapons?" Callahan hesitated. It was subtle, a flicker of doubt, but Keanu saw it. And so did the cameras. The once rigid officer glanced down at Max, who was still curled up by Keanu's feet, his aging body quivering from the adrenaline and fear. Keanu took a slow step forward, his voice softer now, but no less powerful. "This isn't just a dog to me. He's my family." He let the words sink in. "And in case you didn't notice, he's terrified. Not because he's dangerous, but because you are." A hush rippled through the crowd. Callahan's face twitched, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. Every second that passed, more neighbors stepped forward, more phones lifted into the air, more eyes burned into his back. Then the radio on his shoulder crackled to life. "Dispatch to Unit 47. Be advised, additional reports confirm a second, unidentified dog sighted near the South Alley, possibly the stray in question." The crowd stirred. The stray. Julia's voice, sharp and unyielding, cut through the air. "So what? You almost tossed Keanu Reeves' elderly dog because you went after the wrong one?" The shift was instant. The energy turned against them in a way Callahan couldn't ignore. Officer Brooks, now visibly rattled, cleared his throat. "Maybe we should. We're leaving," Callahan snapped, finally conceding, though the bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. He shot Keanu one last look, a mixture of frustration and something else, shame. Without another word, the two officers turned on their heels and walked toward their squad car. But the damage was done. The second they climbed in and drove off, the street erupted. Cheers, murmurs of disbelief, and the sound of multiple notifications chiming as video recordings were instantly uploaded to social media. Keanu let out a slow breath, turning back to Max, kneeling beside him once more. "You okay, buddy?" he murmured, running a hand over his fur. Max licked his palm in response, his tail thumping weakly against the ground. It was enough. But as Keanu glanced up, he saw the way people were already scrolling through their phones, shaking their heads, posting, sharing, tagging. This wasn't just a neighborhood incident anymore. This was about to go viral. And before I tell you how this story exploded across the internet, reaching Hollywood elites, animal rights activists, and even the LAPD itself, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever felt that deep, unspoken connection with an animal, the kind that makes them more than just a pet but family, hit that like button. Because what happened next changed everything. The tension lingered in the air long after the police car disappeared down the street. The murmurs of the gathered crowd filled the silence, a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and admiration for what had just unfolded. Phones were still held high, fingers rapidly typing, videos already being shared with captions like, "Keanu Reeves just defended his elderly dog against the police," and "You won't believe what LAPD did to Keanu's dog." Keanu let out a slow breath, running his hand over Max's fur, feeling the old dog's heartbeat finally start to slow. The tremors of fear still lingered in Max's body, but as Keanu gently scratched behind his ears, the tension in his old companion began to ease. "Come on, buddy. Let's get you inside." The crowd watched as Keanu scooped his dog into his arms with practiced ease, despite Max's large frame. The once trembling Labrador mix let out a tired sigh, pressing his muzzle into Keanu's chest, trusting him completely. The murmurs around them softened, turning into quiet admiration. This wasn't just a celebrity with a pet. This was a man who deeply loved his dog, and that love had just been put to the test in front of the entire world. Inside, Keanu settled Max onto his favorite blanket near the large window where the golden afternoon light spilled onto the hardwood floor. Max's tail thumped weakly against the ground, his breathing steadier now, but his eyes still held traces of confusion. He didn't understand what had just happened. He only knew that for a moment he had felt like he was back at the shelter, alone, unwanted, scared. Keanu knelt beside him, his fingers tracing soothing circles against the dog's fur. "You're safe," he murmured. "No one's ever going to touch you like that again." But as he sat there, his own adrenaline finally wearing off, the reality of the situation settled in. This wasn't just about Max. This wasn't just about one mistake. If this could happen to his dog, if officers could barge onto private property, threaten a 14-year-old senior dog without so much as a second thought, what about the dogs who didn't have owners who could fight for them? How many times had this happened before, but without cameras? Without a neighborhood ready to push back? His jaw tightened. No, this wasn't over. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Julia's phone had barely stopped vibrating since she uploaded the footage. Messages flooded her screen, friends, strangers, journalists all demanding details. The video had already gained hundreds of thousands of views in under an hour, and the numbers were climbing at an unstoppable rate. A sharp knock on her door made her jump. She turned, startled, to see Keanu standing there, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said simply. She stepped aside, leading him into her living room where her laptop screen was already open to the now viral video. The comment section was exploding. "How's this even legal? Keanu being a real-life John Wick for his dog. We love to see it." Keanu's gaze flickered across the headlines being written in real time. News outlets were already picking it up. He exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. "They almost tossed him," Julia said quietly, bringing his attention back. "I don't care who called in that complaint. That's not how you handle an animal." Keanu's jaw clenched. "I need to find out who made that call." Julia hesitated, biting her lip. "I might have something," she admitted, spinning the laptop around. Some of the neighbors were talking, and someone said they overheard a woman down the block complaining about a big dog growling near her house last week. Keanu's brows furrowed. "And she called the police on Max?" Julia shook her head. "That's the thing. No one's sure if she actually called. But there's a stray people have been spotting near the alleyway at night. Some say he's been digging through trash cans looking for food." Keanu leaned back, crossing his arms. A stray. That made sense. It would explain the false report, the way the officers had acted like they were responding to something urgent. But it still didn't explain why they were so quick to escalate. And more importantly, where was the real stray now? His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden buzz of his phone. A text? From his publicist. Call me ASAP. LAPD just released a statement about Max. Keanu's stomach tightened. His gaze flickered to Julia, then back down to the message. A statement? Already? What exactly were they trying to say? And why did he have the sinking feeling that this was only the beginning? The weight of the situation pressed against Keanu's chest, but he didn't let it show. Years in the industry had taught him how to keep his composure even when everything around him was spiraling out of control. This, however, wasn't just another Hollywood scandal or a media-fueled controversy. This was personal. He scrolled through his phone, searching for any lead that could tell him who made the call that nearly cost Max his safety. His assistant had already forwarded him a handful of emails from journalists, advocacy groups, even former police officers who wanted to weigh in on what had happened. But none of that mattered right now. What he needed was the truth. Julia sat on his couch, watching him carefully. So, what's the plan? Keanu exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. First, I want to talk to the neighbors. Someone has to know something. He glanced toward the window where outside, small clusters of residents still lingered in their yards, scrolling through their phones, whispering amongst themselves. The tension in the air hadn't faded, it had only grown heavier. Without another word, Keanu grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. Julia followed. As soon as he set foot on the sidewalk, people turned, hesitating for only a second before approaching. Keanu, man, what happened back there was insane. I still can't believe they thought Max was dangerous. I mean, look at him. This whole thing is blowing up online. You okay? Keanu nodded, offering a small, grateful smile, but he got straight to the point. Does anyone know who actually made the call? His voice was calm, but there was an underlying sharpness to it, an urgency that wasn't there before. The neighbors exchanged glances. No one spoke at first. Then a woman near the back, Mrs. Hoffman, a retired schoolteacher who had lived on the street for decades, cleared her throat. I heard something the other day, she said, her voice low. I don't know if it means anything, but I overheard that new family a few houses down talking about a stray that's been coming around at night. Keanu's attention sharpened. New family? The Whitakers? They moved in last month. I don't know them well, but I saw the wife, Margaret, I think, talking to another neighbor about how she was scared to let her kids play outside because of a big, aggressive dog she'd seen near her garbage cans. A murmur passed through the group. A few nodded in recognition. Someone else chimed in, I heard about that too. But no one's actually seen this dog, have they? That's the thing, Mrs. Hoffman continued. I don't think she ever saw Max. Just a shadow in the alley, maybe. And suddenly, the police are here, storming into your yard. She shook her head, her voice tight with disapproval. Something doesn't add up. Keanu processed this carefully. A stray dog in the neighborhood, someone feeling threatened, a call being placed, but the officers had shown up without hesitation, weapons drawn, treating Max like an active threat. Either the report had been wildly exaggerated or someone had wanted this to happen. He nodded, glancing at Julia. Let's go talk to them. The Whitakers' house was only a few doors down. As Keanu and Julia approached, the front door was already cracked open as if someone had been watching and knew they were coming. A woman in her mid-40s, blonde hair pulled back into a tight bun, stepped out hesitantly. Her eyes flicked to Julia, then to Keanu, widening slightly as she registered who he was. Mr. Reeves, she said cautiously, folding her arms. I assume you're here because of earlier. Keanu kept his tone level. I just want to understand what happened. Did you make the call? Margaret shifted uncomfortably. I reported a stray. A different dog, she emphasized quickly. I saw it 3 nights ago near the alley digging through our trash. It was big, not like your dog, I swear. But I mentioned it to a few people and I guess word must have spread. I never thought they'd show up at your house like that. Julia narrowed her eyes. And what exactly did you say when you called it in? Margaret hesitated. I told them there was a large, aggressive dog roaming the area. Keanu let that sink in. The words large and aggressive had been enough for officers to show up and nearly tase his elderly rescue dog. He didn't want to believe it, but the reality was staring him right in the face. Did you ever describe the dog? Keanu asked, his voice deceptively calm. Margaret swallowed, looking away. No. I was scared, okay? I have kids. I panicked. Keanu nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place. A single phone call. A careless choice of words. And Max had almost paid the price. There was no point in pressing her further. He could see the guilt settling in her eyes, the realization of what her fear had almost caused. He could have yelled, demanded she take responsibility, but what good would it do? The damage was done. Instead, he simply said, "There really is a stray out there, then." Margaret nodded quickly, latching onto the shift in conversation. "Yes. I don't know where it came from, but it's been around for a while. You might have better luck talking to the guys over at the shelter. They've been getting reports about strays lately." Keanu exchanged a glance with Julia, then turned back to Margaret. "Thanks for your time." She nodded stiffly, looking relieved that the conversation was over. As Keanu and Julia walked away, the tension between them was heavy. "So, what now?" Julia asked, watching as he mulled over everything they'd learned. Keanu exhaled. "Now we find that stray. Before someone else does." The tension of the night was thick, hanging over the neighborhood like an unshakable weight. Keanu and Julia walked away from the Whitaker's house, their minds racing. The conversation with Margaret had confirmed what they suspected: Max was never the intended target. There was another dog out there. A stray. One that had been roaming the neighborhood for weeks, scavenging for food, dodging humans, and living on the outskirts of society. And now, after the fiasco with Max, the police and animal control were on high alert. If another call came in, they might not hesitate to take permanent action. Keanu wasn't going to let that happen. As they walked back toward his house, Julia checked her phone. "I've got a few messages from some local rescue volunteers," she said. "They've heard rumors about a big stray in the area, possibly a German Shepherd mix. It's been spotted near dumpsters and back alleys, but no one's gotten close enough to confirm." Keanu nodded. "We need to find him first." Back at the house, Keanu grabbed a bag of dog treats, a flashlight, and an old leash from the closet. Max, still recovering from his own ordeal, lifted his head as Keanu crouched beside him, running a gentle hand over his fur. "We'll be back soon, buddy," he murmured. Max licked his hand, a quiet reassurance, before resting his head back down. Stepping out into the night, Keanu and Julia weren't alone. A few neighbors, still shaken by what had happened earlier, had joined in. Some carried flashlights, others just walked along, murmuring amongst themselves about the stray. "I saw him last week, near the dumpsters behind the grocery store," an older man said. "Poor thing looked half-starved. I think I heard him growling once when I took out the trash," a younger woman added. "But when I turned around, he was already gone." There was a mix of fear and sympathy in their voices. No one had been able to get close to the dog, and after what happened with Max, people were starting to realize fear could turn a misunderstanding into a death sentence. Then Julia froze. "Keanu! Over there!" Just beyond the glow of the streetlights, a large shadow moved in the darkness. A pair of reflective eyes caught the light, glowing like embers against the blackness of the alley. It was him. The stray stood still, watching them, his body tense, ready to bolt at the slightest movement. Keanu slowly raised a hand, palm open, a universal sign of peace. "We're not here to hurt you," he said softly. "We just want to help." The dog didn't move. His ribs were visible beneath his dirty, matted fur. His ears twitched, processing every sound, every movement around him. Then the roar of an engine. Headlights swept across the street as two white trucks pulled up to the curb. The doors swung open and a group of animal control officers stepped out. One of them was holding a tranquilizer gun. Julia's stomach dropped. No. They got here too fast." A tall officer strode toward them, his voice sharp. "We got a report of a dangerous stray. Step back. We'll handle this." Keanu didn't move. "What do you mean, handle this?" he asked, his voice level but firm. The officer adjusted his grip on the tranquilizer gun. "If the dog resists, we'll sedate him and transport him to the shelter." Keanu's jaw tightened. He knew what that meant. If the dog was deemed too aggressive or unadoptable, he wouldn't have a future. "He's scared," Keanu said, voice still calm. "He's not attacking anyone. He's not a threat." The officer's grip didn't relax. "Sir, this isn't up for debate." But Keanu stepped in front of the dog. The neighbors watched in stunned silence. Phones were already out recording. Julia whispered beside him, if they hit him with that dart, he might panic and run into the street. It could kill him. Keanu turned back toward the stray, lowering himself slightly, keeping his voice gentle, steady. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of jerky. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "You're okay." The dog stiffened. His breath was rapid, shallow. For a moment, no one moved. Then the smallest shift. The dog took a step forward. The entire crowd held their breath. Another step. His nose twitched. He could smell the food. Slowly, cautiously, he lowered his head and gently took the jerky from Keanu's hand. The tension snapped like a rubber band. The animal control officers froze. The crowd began to whisper. Keanu slowly reached out, fingers grazing the dog's dirty fur. The dog didn't flinch. He had made his choice. Keanu turned back to the officers. His voice was calm, but there was no room for argument. "We're taking him." The lead officer hesitated. The weight of dozens of recording phones pressed on him. He knew if they did anything now, it would be everywhere. After a long pause, he let out a tense breath. "Fine," he muttered. "But he's your responsibility now." Keanu didn't hesitate. He always was. The officers returned to their trucks, retreating without another word. The stray, still scared, still uncertain, stood by Keanu's side. Maybe for the first time in a long time, he realized he wasn't alone anymore. Keanu reached down, stroking the dog's head. "Let's get you home, buddy." The dog let out a quiet, weary sigh, as if, at last, he believed him. The night was still heavy with tension as Keanu led the stray dog back toward his house. The once distant creature, now walking beside him, was hesitant but no longer trembling with fear. Each step was cautious, every muscle in his body primed to run, yet something about Keanu's presence kept him from bolting. He had made a choice, one born not of trust, but of exhaustion. He had run long enough. Julia walked alongside them, keeping a few steps back, watching in quiet awe. "I can't believe that worked," she whispered. "They were ready to take him away and you just stood there." Keanu glanced down at the dog, offering another small piece of jerky, which was accepted with a slow, wary lick. "Fear makes people act fast," he murmured. "Too fast." His hand hovered near the dog's neck, not touching yet, waiting. "Sometimes you just have to slow things down." The dog, still dirty, ribs still showing through his patchy fur, let out a small huff as if agreeing. The quiet hum of conversation followed them back to Keanu's house, where Max, resting on his favorite blanket, lifted his head. His tired, cloudy eyes blinked, ears twitching as he took in the unfamiliar scent. The stray froze in the doorway. For a moment, neither dog moved. Max, old and steady, studied the newcomer with the patience of a dog who had seen much in his lifetime. The stray, younger but hardened by the streets, stood stiff, his posture uncertain, ready to be rejected, ready for a fight, ready for anything but acceptance. Keanu knelt between them, setting a bowl of water down on the floor. "You're safe here," he said simply. "Both of you." The stray hesitated, then lowered his head to drink. Max, deciding there was no threat, sighed heavily and rested his head back down. That was all the permission the stray needed. He stepped further inside. The next morning, the world had already caught up. #Justice for Max was still trending, but a new wave of posts had taken over. Keanu Reeves just rescued another dog, this time from animal control. First, they went after his elderly dog. Now he saves a stray? This man is a legend. The footage of Keanu standing between the officers and the stray had been seen by millions overnight. But it wasn't just admiration pouring in. Animal rights activists, journalists, and even former law enforcement officials were speaking out. The situation had become bigger than just one mistake. It was a conversation about how quickly animals were deemed dangerous and how often they were put down without a second chance. And then the LAPD released another statement. This time, it wasn't just an attempt at damage control. Following recent events, the department will be reviewing its protocols regarding animal-related calls to ensure more thorough assessments are conducted before engaging with non-threatening animals. "We recognize the importance of community trust and will work alongside local shelters to improve outcomes for stray and lost pets." It wasn't a full admission of wrongdoing, but it was change. Julia read the statement out loud, shaking her head. "They're trying to clean up their mess." Keanu, sitting on the floor beside the stray, let out a slow breath. At least they're acknowledging it. The stray dog, no longer just a shadow in the streets, but someone with a future, lifted his head at the sound of Keanu's voice. His eyes, once dim with fear, held something different now. Recognition. Maybe even trust. Keanu ran a gentle hand over his ragged fur, feeling the raised scars beneath his fingers. "We need a name for you, buddy." Julia tapped her chin, then grinned. "What about Shadow?" Keanu looked down at the dog, the way he had moved unseen for so long, the way he had almost faded away before someone chose to notice. "Shadow," Keanu repeated. The dog let out a quiet breath. It fit. Over the next few weeks, Shadow underwent a transformation. The first few days, he was cautious, hovering near the doors, never fully relaxing, his instincts still screaming at him to be ready to run. But Max was there, watching with old, knowing eyes, showing him that this place was safe. Keanu kept his routine simple: patience, consistency, and time. The first time Shadow let Keanu clip a leash onto his collar without flinching, Julia nearly cheered. The first time he let himself fall asleep on the porch, head resting beside Max, Keanu knew this was home now. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a car pulled up in front of the house. A woman stepped out, tears already in her eyes. Keanu stood, instinctively stepping between her and the dogs. She hesitated. Then, in a shaking voice, she said, I think that's my dog. Julia's breath caught. Keanu turned to Shadow. The dog was staring at the woman. Not with fear, not with anger, with recognition. The woman stepped forward slowly. His name was Ranger. Shadow's ears twitched. She swallowed hard. I lost him months ago. I had to move for work, and I left him with someone I trusted. But they didn't keep him safe. By the time I came back, he was gone. Keanu's chest tightened. He looked at Shadow, who was now standing, tail low, uncertain but not running. This was the moment. The dog had a choice. For a long time he had survived alone, had been abandoned, forced to fend for himself. Keanu found a home, but now here was someone from his past, someone who had loved him. For a long moment, everything was still. Then Shadow took a step forward. The woman let out a soft sob. Shadow took another step, then another, and then, finally, he was pressed against her legs, shaking. Not from fear, but from relief. Keanu exhaled, a small smile forming on his lips. Some stories don't end the way you expect them to. Some second chances come in ways you never planned for. The woman, kneeling, wrapped her arms around Shadow, whispering, I'm so sorry. I missed you so much. Shadow Ranger let out a deep sigh, the weight of the streets, of fear, of survival, finally leaving his body. And in that moment, Keanu knew. This was the ending Shadow had been waiting for. The world had watched this story unfold, but for Keanu it had never been about that. It had been about a dog who had been misunderstood. A dog who had almost been lost forever. Max, resting beside Keanu on the porch that night, gave a knowing look as if to say, You did good, kid. Keanu chuckled softly, scratching behind his old dog's ear. Somewhere out there would always be another Shadow, another Max, another dog in need of someone to see them. And if this story changed even one more life, if it made people slow down, ask questions, choose kindness over fear, then maybe this was never just about one dog at all. Maybe it was about all of them. And now I turn it over to you. This story wasn't just about a dog. It was about second chances, compassion, and the choice to stand up when something isn't right. Keanu didn't just protect Max. He saw the unseen, the forgotten, and proved that one act of kindness can change a life. But what about you? How did this story make you feel? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved it, hit 2 in the comments. If it didn't connect with you, drop a 7. I value all perspectives. And if this story moved you, if you believe in the power of kindness, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it inspires them to help a stray, to speak up for an animal in need, or simply to slow down and see the world with more empathy. For more incredible stories like this, stories that remind us that the world is full of moments waiting to be noticed, make sure to subscribe to Tapestry of Worlds. Together, we can weave stories that matter. Because sometimes all it takes is one person, one moment, one choice to change everything.